So basically, Poor Magazine is indigenous people led, poor people led, which was started right here by my sister and her mother when they were both living houseless here in America, as many of us have experienced, or we know people that have experienced that. What we do at Poor Magazine is basically we do media. We think that media is a powerful tool that right now is being used against the oppressed people, especially corporate media, where you have corporate media always talking about our people, but never giving the tools for our people to speak for themselves. And so we do journalism. We also have a web page where we publish articles. And another thing that
as a circle of landless, poor, indigenous peoples from many different places, we start by honoring our ancestors. Because those are the shoulders. So if you came as a special guest, introduce yourself and one line about your struggle or your privilege. Yes, I did say struggle or privilege in life. And introduce yourself, where you come from, who you is, however you want to say it. But that has to be, as we say in Poor Magazine, media is inside of immediacy. So 60 seconds or less, folks. That's it. And then the time clock will go down. Then we'll go back around and get our special guests in the space. And I do want to just give a really big, huge moment hand, because as most of y'all know, we launched Poor News Network PNN LA, but we also this year launched PNN Toronto. And we have PNN Toronto representative in the house, Chanel the Lovely. She'll be introducing herself, but that's pretty exciting. Anyway, I am gonna go that way.
Okay. So I'm Martin. I'm the graphic designer here at Poor Magazine. And I'm the son of two immigrant parents from Mexico who crossed the border to give me and my sister a better life.
So my name is Chanel. I'm from Toronto, and I organize sex workers, and I'm a second generation sex worker myself. And I organize. I'm a formerly poor person. I'm not a poor person anymore, but I grew up on welfare.
Mirkarimi. I am honored to be with you all here tonight. Thank you for the invitation from Tiny and Poor Magazine. I'm humbled and privileged to be the elected sheriff of San Francisco. I was elected a year ago. Before that, I was the supervisor for District 5, the Fillmore, for 7 years, and before that worked in the district attorney's office, then for 9 years, and before that worked for probably one of the more well-known left supervisors in the early 90s. That was Supervisor Terrence Hallinan. I was his legislative chief. I ran for sheriff as an outspoken progressive, as I've always been, hoping that we can sort of stop or stem the tide of the dehumanizing of those who are incarcerated and those who are formerly incarcerated. That's why I'm sheriff. Order or in violation of the law. But as sheriff, I have the ability to use my discretion to at least put a stall, slow it up a little bit, or to determine if there's been any problems. And as Tiny had suggested, flags definitely came up with evictions related to what I think are improper or illegal foreclosures. And as when I came into the office as sheriff, before when I was supervisor too, we questioned if nobody is evaluating whether a foreclosure is really legitimate or not, then the domino effect is that why is it that we're then evicting people from an improper foreclosure? And there's been no local law on this at all, because everyone keeps saying it's a state or federal law. Well, our Attorney General, Kamala Harris, got a lot of ink in the press about trying to reform the laws, but I haven't seen it really filter down to a local empowerment that allows us to still question that. If there's a takeaway from this discussion, I would seriously encourage to be the kind of advocacy to City Hall, the mayor, and the Board of Supervisors of empowering the sheriff's department in us trying to expand our eviction assistance unit so that we are, when we're sending a scout out there to help the many dozens and dozens and dozens of people every week that we are required to evict, to try to find a way to stave off that eviction, if that's possible, but we don't really have the staff for it, or for creating legislation that empowers the city government to create sort of a public advocate on behalf of those who cannot afford an attorney, or those who cannot really afford the resources or wherewithal to represent them, so that they are getting more of a fair representation in a legal proceeding before being evicted. Not having that infrastructure leaves people, and certainly the most poor, I think, vulnerable to the likelihood of evictions occurring. So I'll end on that note. I'm more than happy to answer any questions, and thank you.
Okay, so that's all I got right now. Okay.
So as I said, I went to the junior college, and I'm a paralegal. I used to work at this place called the East Bay Community Law Center. We dealt with eviction defense. So I call myself well, my friends call me, my one attorney friend called me a street attorney. I call myself a guerrilla attorney with a U. And I would Have you guys dealt with anything called, since you are the chief levying officer and you have to levy out and you have to carry out your duties, what do you do with post-judgment rights to possessions? Like if somebody else is in that house, they have to serve that other person. And many times with foreclosure evictions, they give you a 3-day notice to quit. And if there's anybody else in that unit, they have to go through a process. Sometimes that person doesn't know the process. Sometimes that person isn't a named defendant in the actual case. So it takes them a while to get into the process. I think, if it was me just thinking 4 or 5 minutes, that you should, with your eviction assistance people, should try to get people to fill out pre-judgment rights to claim
advocacy in place, because the sheriff's department is not allowed, and no sheriff's department is. In fact, 2 or 3 years ago, when the housing crisis was really taking its toll nationally, there were several sheriffs who actually made some headline news and said they were not going to evict on foreclosures. I called them up because I thought, wow, if other sheriffs in much more conservative areas were inspired to do that, I want to know how they can do it, because I know a little bit something about the law and how they would be able to defy the federal law on this and even their own state law. 2 weeks later, within 2 weeks, they were back to doing evictions. It's because they don't get the level of state support that gives them, through their own legislative government, the power to be able to do the kind of things you're talking about. But what we do, thanks to the Eviction Assistance Unit, is that 5-day notice, not 3, but 5-day notice is what we use. And we always try to make sure that somebody has a place to go. And so we put the notice there, and the person that we send out to scout talks them through about their options and where they can go if in
Let's
fact.
hear from Ish.
You're sitting right in front of the Al Robles Living Library. And I was privileged enough to try to stop the evictions at International Hotel. Yeah, about 35 years ago or so. And I really admired Hongisto because he resisted
That's right.
evictions for a long time until he got the word that he was going to be arrested if he didn't evict people. I'm just wondering if it comes down to this and you take this moral stand and not evict people, and it comes to your job, what would you do? And maybe this is so hypothetical.
Well, it is hypothetical, and it wouldn't make sense like it wasn't for Sheriff Hongisto, who went to jail, and because he wouldn't evict on the High Hotel, but he ended up evicting them after he was convicted of a misdemeanor for contempt of court. So then he went back to doing the eviction. So it's essentially fruitless to make sort of a hollow statement I mean, what you want to do is work on not the edge, but directly in the center of making sure that the sheriff's department is not the last and only the last sort of refuge to make a stand that's not going to amount to the desired effect. I mean, that's just kind of really pointless if you think about it. I mean, the strategy has to be more collective in that you're holding accountable everybody from the mayor to the board of supervisors to the city attorney to everybody in law enforcement who has some role in this, and the sheriff's department, not singly the sheriff's department. And as I said earlier, several sheriffs I talked to over the last 2 or 3 years, they all went back to evicting.
Okay. So I want to say actually, because circling back to Ish's comment and to the fact that I'm a survivor of houselessness with me and my mom and several evictions, mostly because of poverty, because we didn't have the money to pay the rent, straight up. Which I understand you being an officer of the government would probably say, well then that was a crime, you know, because it is on the books, on the U.S. justice system, which is a setup from the get up for poor people and peoples of color, that is a crime. But from the perspective of revolutionaries who are actually trying to move off of these systems, which could evict an elder who's lived in her house for 40 years out of her home, who never did one thing wrong, who paid the bills and did all the things the American dream says you have to do. I don't accept that. And I also want to commend you because I know you're in this room, and I want to say thank you for coming here. I want to say thank you for being in this and witnessing with us, right? But I do want to also push back. And I want to say, if you're in this room, then it's my duty as a survivor, the daughter of Mama D, as a niece of Uncle Al, and thank you for bringing his name in the room, and as a friend and a compañera to my sister Kathy, who we had to house through the underground SRO railroad, which I'm sure you'll be happy to read that story when it comes out, because she would have been on the street, a disabled elder with her dog Betty, on the street. But Uncle Joe, an elder who lives in the San Cristino Hotel in one room, put her up because we asked him to, and Uncle Bruce, that's where she's staying now, another SRO dweller, on the street after 40 years in her house. So I have to push back and I have to say, no, it doesn't matter that Hangisto went to jail for a night and then came out with the same thing, because that meant that 220 elders in the I Hotel were not on the street as soon as they were on the street. And if that's all we have to work with within the criminal injustice system, then I'm going to push back on you, my friend Ross, and say, think about that, because I refuse to just accept that we need to ask everybody. You know already that Avalos and those cats tried to put that foreclosure moratorium. You know that people like you in the Hollywood halls of the plantation known as City Hall are trying to move with activism. But that's not enough, right? And the buck does stop with you. And I just want you to hear us on that, hear us collectively, hear the humbleness of Kathy, who's your fan, even throughout that, and how beautiful that is. And that there's so many Kathys walking softly on Pachamama, and Ingrid's and all the rest of us here. And Nandi and Viv, you haven't met her, and all of our other welfare queens, evicted, foreclosed, and out on the street with our babies and our children and our dog Betty, who's permanently traumatized now. Anyway.
Well, let me just say that I don't think we can skip certain steps, and that Ish's question to me does skip some steps, because if you look back at what Sheriff Hangisto was faced with, that doesn't necessarily mean he had to do that in order to save 5 days from them being evicted or not out of the I Hotel. What he did was brave and courageous, and he was the first progressive sheriff. Then Mike Hennessy followed, although his time was small. And I don't necessarily agree that City Hall has done everything that they possibly can. I mean, even if my progressive colleagues putting out a resolution that has no teeth doesn't necessarily mean that that is the potency that's reached its potential. I don't agree with that at all. Because I was at a time on a board of supervisor which got a lot of flack when Chris Daly and I and others would roll up our sleeve and really sort of, you know, insist in a loud way that change sometimes had to come with a great amount of voraciousness. And we got criticized for that at times because we wouldn't settle for that weak response, like a resolution that has no teeth, no accountability. So the sheriff, if I am where the buck stops with me, then I'll make, I think, a very methodical decision and consider the risk that Ish had asked me about. Would I do X? But to do that, and not hold everyone else accountable, and did you do the due diligence in really trying to do more than just make a statement that's not going to amount to the desired result? Well, then we're all held accountable.
Well, I will give you this commitment that everyone in this room, if you do to make that decision, we will be there
Thank you.
at the jailhouse.
And provide
eating you better
food. Yes, and provide food.
Okay,
That's
so
right.
let's give